Hello friends, welcome back to CSharp.net online training video series. Today we are going to discuss interface in C Sharp. Actually, I have divided this interface section, this interface concept into three parts, and this is part one. And in this part one, what I'm going to discuss the concept related to interface, what are the rules and regulation, how you can use interface, how you can create interface, right? What are the things you can put inside an interface, what are the things you can do with interface, what are the things you cannot do with interface, right? All these things we are going to discuss in today's section, right? And in part 2, what we are going to discuss, we are going to discuss top 20 interview questions, most frequently asked interview questions related to interface. And in part 3, I will show you how to use interface in your real-time application development by taking one real-time example, right? So let's start today's session. The first question that comes to your mind is, what is an interface? Let's read the definition. The interface is a fully unimplemented class used for declaring a set of operation of an object. What it means? It means inside a interface, you cannot declare non-abstract methods. Inside a interface, you cannot declare a method with body. What you can declare? A method without body. So whenever we are saying a method without body, it means what? It means it's a abstract method. And inside a interface, you can declare only abstract method. You cannot declare non-abstract method. This is the reason why it is said to be a fully unimplemented class. Unimplemented class means all the methods are not implemented inside the interface, right? So this is what you need to understand. The second point is it is used to achieve multiple inheritances, right? As we already discussed, in C Sharp, by using classes, we cannot implement multiple inheritance. Multiple inheritance means one child class having multiple parent class. So a child class can have a single parent class, right? You cannot implement or you cannot inherit two classes to a single child class, right? A child class can have only immediate parent class, right? But if you want to achieve multiple inheritance where one child having multiple parents, right? Then this concept can be implemented or can be achieved in C Sharp using interfaces only, right? We have a separate section or we have a separate video where we are going to discuss this multiple inheritances with multiple inheritances in C Sharp with interfaces. Why we cannot implement using classes? What are the problem we will face in multiple inheritance with class, and how we can overcome multiple inheritances, that ambiguity issue by using interface? We will discuss in detail, right? Now, till now, what we are learning? We are learning classes, we are learning abstract classes. What is a class? Means it is a user-defined data type. Then what is an interface? Technically, it is also user-defined data type. If class is a user-defined data type and if interface is also user-defined data type, then what is the difference between them? What is the difference between a class? What is the difference between an abstract class? What is the difference between a interface? Let us try to understand. See, a class can contain only the methods which contains the method body. See, if you are declaring a class, then you can declare only non-abstract method. You can say non-abstract method means you can declare only concrete methods. Okay. To give you a better clarity, what I'm doing, I'm creating one class. Inside a class, suppose I'm creating one class called CLS one, and inside this class you can declare only method with implementation. See, I'm providing implementation, but you cannot declare method with what or without implementation. So this is not possible, right? This is not possible in a class, right? But if you are creating an abstract class, it can contain both. What it can contain? It can contain both abstract method and the non-abstract methods, right? So you can see, right? So inside a class, you cannot declare abstract methods, right? You cannot declare abstract method in a class. You can only declare concrete methods. You can only declare non-abstract method. But inside an abstract class, you can declare non-abstract method, which is also, which is also people are saying as contract method, and this is going to be your abstract method, right? Both are going to be why we are getting the error. Let's see the error. Okay, same memo. You need to give a different name. Here you also need to give a different name. So you can see inside the abstract class, you can have abstract method as well as non-abstract method. But what you can declare inside an interface means you can declare only abstract method, right? So void, okay, let me copy these two statements, paste it here. You can declare only abstract methods. You cannot declare method with implementation, right? So you can see here I'm not getting while I'm ending the method with semicolon, I'm not getting any error. But while I'm providing implementation, I'm getting some error, right? You can see what it is saying. The interface member cannot have a definition. You cannot declare method with body, right? Inside an interface. So that is what I'm saying here. Class contains only non-abstract method means method with body. Abstract class contain both non-abstract method with body and a abstract method without body. Interface contains only abstract method means method without body. That is what we have just said. What are abstract method? We already discussed. Why do we need abstract method? How to implement abstract method in our previous session. If you have not watched those videos, then I'm requesting you to watch those video before coming to this session, because in that session we have already discussed what are abstract methods, abstract classes, interview questions. We have also discussed how to use abstract class in real-time application development, right? So we have one note point. Every abstract method of an interface should be implemented by the child class of the interface without any help. For example, if you are declaring some method inside an interface, suppose you declare method 1 and method 2 inside an interface, then it is the responsibility of the child class of this interface to provide implementation to these two methods without any. It is mandatory to provide implementation to all the abstract methods, right? That is what we have discussed. Now, what we discussed in inheritance means a class inherits from another class. The child class consumes the member of the parent class, right? Suppose this is your class A. This class A having some properties, some data member, some member function, right? And this is your child class. This child class inherit from this class A. So that means class B is the child class A is the parent class. And when we establish the parent-child relationship, I mean, you can also say whenever we are making the inheritance relationship, then the child class can consume all the members of parent class, right? But except the private member. We already discussed private member cannot be consumed by the child class. Child class can consume all the member except the except the private member. This is what we learn in inheritance, right? Now, just like a class is having class as a parent class, in this case, this is class, and the parent class is also a class. Similarly, a class can have an interface as the parent class. A class can have an interface is the parent class. Just like a class is having another class as a parent, a class can also have an interface as a parent. If a class has an interface as a parent, right? Suppose this child class is the parent of this interface, then the child class is responsible for providing implementation to all the methods that are defined inside the interface. Whatever method you declared inside the interface, now it is the responsibility of the child class to provide implementation, right? For example, if you come into this phrase, suppose I'm creating one class. I'm creating class CLS3. I'm creating one class called CLS3. I'm implementing this class from interface 1. Then now it is the responsibility of child class. This class 3 should take the responsibility to provide implementation to all those two methods. Now see, I'm not implementing. So what I'm getting some kind of error. What error? Class 3 doesn't implement the interface member I1.m1. M1 method is not implemented in class 3, right? Class 3 or CLS3 doesn't implement interface member I1.m2. Now you can see we are getting two error. Why two error? Because there are two abstract method inside the interface. Now it is the responsibility of the class to provide implementation of all the interface method. How we are going to implement that we will see. But the point that you need to remember, implementing all the interface under the child class is mandatory. right? So simply speaking, the parent interface imposes a restriction on the child classes. What restriction? The restriction are to implement each and every method of the interface under the child class. See here, the interface restricting on the class. What restriction or what restriction this interface providing? And the restriction is that as you want to become my child, if you want to become my child, then you have to implement what I am providing to you. I am providing you two methods, and you want to become my child, then you have to implement those two methods. Until and unless you are not implementing what restriction I'm giving to you, you cannot become a child of mine, right? So this is what restriction the parent interface providing. Generally, a class inherits from another class to consume the member of its parent. Suppose a class is inheriting from another class, then whatever member you defined inside the class, those member are going to consumed by the child class. But if you are making a class inheriting from another from an interface like this, so in this case, this class is not going to consume the member what you defined inside the interface. Rather, the class is going to provide implementation to the method that are defined inside the interface. That is, if your class is implementing an interface, it doesn't mean the class is going to consume the member of interface. Rather, it is going to implement the member of the interface, right? And a class can inherit from a class and interface at a time. So this is also possible. Suppose this is class 1, this is class 3. The class 3 can inherit from class 1 as well as from interface at the same time, right? This is also possible. Now let us see how we can create an interface in CSharp. The way we define a class, in the same way we need to define an interface. See how we are creating the class. Now we are creating the class by using the modifier public or internal. Then we need to use the keyword class followed by the class name, and inside the class you can define the member, right? If it is a class, you can define it only non-abstract method. If it is abstract class, you can define abstract member as well as non-abstract member. But in the case of a non-abstract class, not only you have to use class keyword, but also you have to use the abstract keyword, right? In the same way, the way you are defining your class definition, in the same way you can define your interface definition. How? Now you have to use the modifier. Modifier means access modifier. And what are the modifier applicable to a type? Only two. What are these two? Public and internal, right? If you are making the interface as a public, then it will available within the same assembly as well as within the other assembly. If you are making internal, then this interface is going to be available only within the same assembly, right? Then you have to use the interface keyword followed by the interface name. Most importantly, you can declare only abstract member. You cannot define a method with body. You can only define method without body. For example, suppose you are declaring one text interface, right? Then you have to use the keyword text, and then you have to provide the interface name, and within the body you can declare the member. And if you are not using any modifier, right? Access modifier is optional. If you are not using any access modifier, then by default it is going to be a internal interface. If you want, then you can also use public like this, right? It is also possible. You can use the public keyword, right? This is how you are going to declare your interface. Now, how to define abstract method in an interface? Already we have discussed how to create abstract method in our previous session. How to create abstract method means you have to end the method with a semicolon without implementation, and you need to use the keyword for abstract, right? And the method should be going to be public. Public abstract is mandatory in the case of abstract class, and the method is going to be end with a semicolon without its implementation. But this is not the case if you are going to declare the abstract method inside an interface. Inside an interface, you do not need to require to use these two things. Public abstract is not required. Why it is not required? Now, by default, all the members are going to be public and abstract. If by default they are going to be public and abstract, then why you will allow you to use the public and abstract? If he will allow, then you can. It might be possible that instead of public, you can write protected. Instead of abstract, you can write a different modifier, like, right? So this is the reason why they are not allowing these two things, right? So how to define an abstract method inside an interface means only this much. This much is enough. You can see void add I'm just passing two parameters and ending the method with a semicolon. This is how you need to define abstract method inside an interface. No need to use public abstract. Why? By default, they are going to be public abstract. If you are writing void int, void add int num1 num2, it means this method is going to be public abstract void add, right? See, while working with interface, we need to remember some point. Some point means some rules and regulations that we need to remember, that we need to learn, because those are important role. Those are going to play important role. The rules are important, right? What are the things you can do with an interface? What are the things you cannot do with an interface, that we need to discuss. Let us discuss few points which are important from interface point of view, right? The first point that you need to remember is the default scope for the interface member are by default public, whereas it is private in the case of a class. See, in this is a class. If I'm not using this public access specifier here, then by default this method is going to be private. So this is private method. But here we are not using any kind of access specifier, but by default this is going to be public, right? The interface member are going to be by default public, and the class member is going to be by default private. That is the first point that you need to remember. Second point, the point that you need to remember is by default every member of an interface is abstract. So as by default every member is going to be abstract, we do not require to use the abstract modifier, right? Just we did in the case of abstract class. So for example, you can see, suppose this is one interface, and in this interface I'm not writing void, I'm not writing abstract, I'm not writing public. Then by default it is going to be public and abstract only, right? This is the reason why it is not allowing you to write public and abstract, because by default, right? Point three is, the third point that you need to remember is, we cannot declare fields variable constructor in an interface, right? For example, this is one interface. In this interface, you cannot declare a field or variable like this. Field are not allowed. Even you cannot declare a constructor like this, right? This is also not allowed. See, you are getting one error. What I mean, interface cannot contain fields. So field or variables are not allowed. Interface cannot contain constructor. Constructors are also not allowed, right? So you can see interface. So we have seen that these are the two error I'm showing. Interface cannot contain field and interface cannot contain constructor, right? Then what interface content? So you can declare properties, right? I can declare properties, but you cannot use the public, because by default they are going to be public properties. You can declare properties, right? So we need to know what are the things you can declare inside the interface and what are the things you cannot declare inside an interface. See, an interface can contain abstract method, yes, properties, yes, indexes, yes, event. What are indexes, events? We will discuss. But as of now, we have discussed properties and abstract method. So I'm showing these two you can declare. An interface cannot declare non-abstract method, data fields, constructor, and a destructor. See, this is this is an interface. So constructor, yeah. So constructor is not applicable. We have discussed constructor is not applicable. Even you cannot declare a destructor is not applicable, right? Even you cannot declare variable, right? Integer x equals to 10. You cannot declare like this. Even you cannot declare method with implementation. These things are not applicable within an interface, that you need to remember, right? The fourth point that you need to remember is, if require, an interface can inherit from another interface, right? So it is possible that one interface can inherit from another interface. For example, what I'm doing, I'm declaring one. So this is my interface one. This is one interface. I can create another interface inheriting from the interface one. So this is possible. So in this case, I can provide m2 here. So now this interface is inheriting from another another interface, right? So in this case, what will happen? Now the class which is, suppose I am creating one class, right? Class CLS3, it is implementing I1, right? So the class 3 is implementing I1 and class 4 is implementing I2. So what will happen in this case? Class 3 needs to provide implementation for this method only. Class 3 needs to provide implementation only the method which is defined in interface 1. But in class 3, okay, let me give this class 4. In this case, class 4 is inheriting from interface 2. But interface 2 is internally inheriting from interface 1. What it means? The class 4 needs to provide implementation for both the methods, right? The interface method defined in I1 as well as interface method defined in I2. So all these two methods needs to be implemented by this class. So this is the point that you need to remember, right? Now you may have one question: why do we need to separate in two separate interfaces? Why not one? You may have question: why I'm going to create two interfaces and why I'm going to inherit like this? That the reason is all the related member you can put inside an interface. You cannot put on the related member inside one interface, right? If you are declaring I1 means I1 related method you can only declare here, right? You cannot declare I2 related methods here or I3 related methods here. Why? This is one of the solid principle, right? If you know solid, then there is something called interface segregation principle. Instead of creating a big interface, split the interface into small interface, right? If you have not if you do not know solid principle, then please watch our solid principle video series. There we have explained this concept in detail, right? So the point that you need to remember, one interface can inherit from another interface, and in this case if any class implement this interface 1, then he needs to provide implementation for this add method, and if any class inherit from this interface 2, then he needs to provide implementation for both the add and the sub method. That is the point that you need to remember. Next, the fifth point that you need to remember is every member of an interface should be implemented under the child class without fail. But while implementing, we do not require to use the override modifier. See how we are implementing that. Now we need to discuss, right? So let me copy the code and paste it here. See, this is my interface 1, and in this interface, I'm declaring one method. By default, this method is going to be public abstract void add. And this is another interface which is implementing this interface 1. One interface can inherit from another interface. That is possible, right? So this interface. Now, this interface contain one method, but this interface having two methods, sub method as well as the parent interface method. So this is my implementation class 1, right? This is my implementation class 1, and this class implement the first interface. And inside this first interface, only one method is there. Then how to implement the method? See, this is only abstract method. But in the case of abstract class, abstract method, we are using override modifier to implement the abstract method. But this is not the same in the case of interface. In interface, you do not need to be required. You do not require to use the override modifier. Directly, you can implement the method the way you are implementing any class. So public void add, this is enough. No need to write the override modifier because this is not this is because by default inside an interface you are only defining abstract method. In interface there is no chance of defining any non-abstract method, right? So compiler knows this is an interface and this interface having only abstract method. So no need to write override. I understand this thing. Please implement the method the way you are implementing in a normal class. So you can see this is the way. So the same signature, and most importantly, you need to use the public keyword because the method is public inside an interface and it is mandatory to use the public keyword here, right? You cannot write protected private. See, if I'm removing this one, then I will get one compiled error. What error I'm getting? See, it is saying it is not implementing, right? So if I'm writing private, then also the error is not going. But as soon as I make this method to public, then you will see that the error is going. That means mandatory, you have to use the public keyword, right? And this is our implementation class 2. And this implementation class to implement this interface 2. Inside this interface 2, you are declaring one abstract method, but this interface also inheriting from this interface, right? And inside this interface 1, we are having the add method. That means here you need to provide implementation not only to the sub method, but also to the add method. See, I'm providing implementation to the add and sub method. Now what I'm doing, I'm commenting this one. Once I comment this, then we will get some compile time error. What error it is saying? Now implementation class 2 doesn't implement interface member, i.e. interface 1 add method, right? So this add method of IInterface1 you have not implemented. You have to implement it, right? Once you implement that method, then the error will be gone. So this is the point that you need to remember, right? And we have already seen while implementing, using the public access specifier is mandatory. If you remove the public access specifier, then you will get this error, right? So let us understand all these things what we have discussed with one example, right? So with the main method, right? So what I'm doing, I have already discussed. This is interface one. This is interface two inheriting from interface. This is implementation class one, and this is implementation class two, right? I'm creating an object of implementation class. Using this object, you can only call this add method because this in implementation class contains only this method, right? And you cannot call this method. If you try to call, then you will get this error because this class doesn't have any idea regarding this of method. Now, implementation class 2 implement interface 2, right? And interface 2 implement internally interface 1. What it means, now both add and sub method are implemented inside this implementation 2 class, right? So now using that instance, you can call both add method and sub method, right? Now if you run the application, you will get the output as expected, right? This object 1 call the add method, and using object 2 we are calling both add and a sub method. You can see this is the output, right? So now let us move to the next one. We cannot create an instance of an interface like the abstract class. You cannot also create an instance of an interface, but you can also create an reference of an interface like the abstract class. See, in our abstract class section, we have discussed we cannot create an instance of an abstract class, but we can create a reference of an abstract class. The same thing is also applicable here. We cannot create an instance of an interface, but we can create a reference of an interface, right? The interface reference is going to hold the child class instance, right? Using the interface reference, we can only invoke the methods which are declared inside the interface, right? Let us understand this with one example, right? Right. So in this case, you can see this is interface one, and this interface is implemented by this class. So this is nothing but your child class, and this child class implement add method. This is the interface method, and this is a pure child class member, right? So this method signature is not declared inside this interface. This is a pure child class member, but interface one know about this method because the signature is defined here. Now what I'm going to do, I'm creating one child class instance, right? This is your child class instance, but I'm storing that child class instance in the parent reference variable. And here the parent is nothing but one interface. So interface storing the child class instance. So using this reference variable obj, you can only invoke the add method. Why? Because the add method signature only available inside this interface, but you cannot invoke this sub method. You will get one. Even though the child class object this reference variable is storing, even though this child class having this method definition, you cannot call this. Why? See, whenever we are executing our application, two steps process. In the first process, the compiler compile the program, and in the second process, the CLR is going to run the code, right? In the compilation time, we are only getting the error. Forget about the run time. So why we are getting this error? At the time of a compilation, the compiler will check what is the type of this reference variable. His compiler will not checking what is the object this reference variable is storing. This is the object this reference variable is pointing to. What this reference variable type is this. So the compiler will check what is the type of this reference variable. Yes, the reference variable type is ITest interface one. So for this method call add, is there any method declared inside this interface which is taking two integer parameter? So it will come to this interface and it will check, yes, there is a method defined add which is taking two method parameter, right? Two integer parameter. So the compiler will make a link with this method call to this method, right? So the compilation process completed. Now coming to this part. So when this part is coming to this part means again the compiler will check what is the type of this obj interface one, ITest interface one. Now you will check, is this sub method, is there any sub method declared inside this interface which is taking two parameter. No, there is no sub method. So the compiler is going to give you compile time error, right? At runtime, the CLR is going to check what is the instance. What is the instance this object is pointing? Yes, add method. Yes, the instance is implementation class one. So the CLR will go to the this class and CLR will try to execute the add method from there. So this is how the compilation and execution takes place, right? So in this case, compiler is going to throw you error because the sub method signature is not available inside this interface, right? So while working with the interface, there is one important concept that we need to understand: explicit interface implementation. So the way in this example, we are implementing the interface using the public access specifier, right? Without using public access specifier, we can also implement the interface member. How? Now, by using the explicit interface implementation. So when each interface method is implemented separately under the child class by providing the method name along with the interface name, then it is called explicitly interface implementation. But in this case, while calling the method, we should compulsorily use the interface reference that is created using the object of a class or typecast the object to the appropriate interface type. I'm sure you are getting confused with this paragraph, right? 100% I'm sure you are not understanding what I'm saying. To understand this, we need to understand practically, right? Let me show you the example so that you will understand this thing in a better manner, right? So what I'm doing, I'm copy pasting the code. I'm copy pasting the code. See, this is interface one. Inside this interface, I'm declaring two abstract method, right? And this interface implementing these two methods. But remember, this interface is so this method add is implemented using the normal way. Interface method implementation in a normal way. So here we are using the public keyword and we are just implementing the normal way. But in this case, if you remember, I'm not using public, rather I'm specifying the interface name and dot before the method name. So this is nothing but explicitly interface implementation. Explicitly interface implementation means while implementing the interface method inside the child class, we need to explicitly specify from which interface this method belongs to. Yes, this sub method belongs to interface one. So we need to specify interface one dot sub. And while implementing this, we need to avoid that public keyword. Why? Now compiler know that this method is declared as public inside this interface. So no need to declare that again, right? While you are using interface one means by default it is going to be public. So you should not use the public keyword again. If you try to use, then you will get some kind of a error, right? So you can see we are getting error. What saying the modifier public is not valid for this item. So you cannot use public. So this is nothing but explicit interface implementation. You can see you need to implement the method by using the interface name followed by the dot operator, right? This is how you can implement. But the thing that you need to remember, this is not done yet. So using the child class instance, you can call this method directly. But using the child class instance, you cannot call this method directly. How to call? Now, while calling this method, we have two options. First, either we need to typecast that instance to this interface type, or we need to create the parent class reference variable pointing to this class, right? So let's see. I'm creating an instance of this class, right? So I'm creating an instance of the child class, and using that child class instance, I can call the add method because the add method is implemented in the normal way using the public access specifier. So you can call this add method, but you cannot call this sub method using the same way. You cannot call this obj1 dot sub method. You will get some kind of error because this is not a normal method implementation. This sub method is a explicitly interface implementation. As this method is implemented explicitly, we also need to tell the compiler explicitly, right? We need to tell the compiler explicitly that this method implementation belongs to this interface. So how you can do? You need to do typecast. So this is object one, and you need to typecast this object to the interface type, and then you need to call the interface method. So this is one of the way to call the explicit interface implementation method. And the other way, just create the reference type. Just create the interface reference variable pointing to the child class object, and using this reference variable you can call both the method, because this method is executed and this method is also going to be executed because the reference type is interface one only, right? So no need to typecast. So this is how you can implement. Now the most important question that should come to your mind is when we need to declare, when we need to go for explicit interface implementation. For example, see what I'm doing. I'm creating another interface 2 with the same set of member. I'm declaring this method with the same set of a member, right? And what I'm doing, I'm inheriting this method also, this class also from this, right? So in this case, while I'm inheriting from interface 1 and interface 2, I'm getting one error. What error I'm getting? Implementation class doesn't implement interface member interface 2.text, right? So in this case, it is not showing any error. So in this case, it is not showing error for this add method of interface 2, right? Whenever you are implementing one method in a normal way, if that method is available in two interfaces, then it is fine. This interface will think that this method implementation belongs to this interface only. Even the same feeling for this interface too. The iText interface too also feeling that this add method what the child implementing their class not only belong but all this method only, right? This method what I'm declaring here, the child implementing that method, this is this interface thinking, and the same thinking for this interface also. But while you are implementing the interface explicitly, this interface one think that yes, the child class implementing me explicitly, but this implementation is not belongs to this implementation, right? And in this case, you need to go for explicitly interface implementation. Now what you can do, you can declare this interface two method like this. So in this case, the compiler will think that this method declaration belongs to this class, and this method declaration implementation belongs to this interface only, right? But if you are not declaring the members, right? But what you can do, but if you are not going for explicitly interface explicitly implementation, then what you can do, you can write like this, right? So what you can do, you can comment this two statement. So this is fine. In this case, you are not going to get any error because this interface think that this method or those methods are implemented in the child class, right? So this method thinking, yes, my method are implemented in the child class, and this method also feels that whatever I am declaring in my class, so those two methods are also implemented in the child class. But whenever you are going for explicitly implementation, then you need to tell them explicitly, you need to implement them separately, right? So this is how you can implement interface separately. So in the next session, in the next video, what we are going to discuss, we are going to discuss the most frequently asked interview questions on interface. Thank you for watching this video.